Hi, folks. I'm Steve Mitchell. I'm one of the co-owners of Scuppernong Books here in Greensboro, North Carolina. And it's great to see people from all over the place. Many of you I know, and many of you I do not. And one of the wonders we have learned in the COVID era and the Zoom era is that you can do events that people can join from all over the country and in fact, all over the world. So it's really wonderful to be able to do this. This event came out of a book club that has been going on at Scuppernong Books for about 3 years now. It's the Reading the World Book Club, and we meet every month to read a contemporary author in translation. And so we've read books from all over the world. And of course, the thing that joins all of these books together is the fact that somebody has worked long and hard to translate this book from its original language into a language that we can read. And we in the Reading the World Book Club are extremely grateful for the people who do this for us and allow us to read books from all over the world and enjoy cultures and writing from places we would never be able to otherwise. And just so you know, there's like a real movement in the literary world right now to give translators much more credit than they have been given in the past, and actually to include them in royalty payments now, which is something that translators have not been afforded in the past. So we may be reaching a place where translators are actually getting their due in the publishing industry. There's also a poetry book club at Scuppernong Books, and they read a number of books in translation as well. You can join either of these book clubs, and I am going to put a link in the chat so that you can check them out if you like, because you can read your book wherever you are and join us as we go. We're going to save all questions until the end, but if you have questions as we go along, you are welcome to put them in chat and we will try and get to them. We will get to them. I'm promising we will get to your question before we end the evening. Adam, I just realized that I am completely unprepared and I do not have a bio on you.
Okay.
Can I ask you just to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone. My name is Adamwinkle. I am an associate professor of Spanish at High Point University. I've been there for about 10 years and I live in Greensboro. I'm a big fan of Scuppernong Books. I participate in the poetry book club that Steve just mentioned. And I really wanted to thank him and the Reading the World Book Club for giving me the opportunity to moderate this discussion with Donald Winkler. Don has been very, very gracious in his time and his thoughts on translation as I've gotten in touch with him to prepare for this. So this is a real thrill for me. So thank you, Steve, and thanks to Don. And I'm just going to introduce Don, and then I've got a series of questions just to kind of get talking about translation, and hopefully it'll be an enjoyable experience for all of you. Donald Winkler was born in Winnipeg. He graduated from the University of Manitoba, and as a Woodrow Wilson Scholar, he did graduate study at the Yale School of Drama. From 1967 to 1995, he was a film director and a writer at the National Film Board of Canada in Montreal. And since the 1980s, he's been a translator of Quebec literature. In 1994, 2011, and 2013, he won the Governor General's Award for French to English translation, and he has been a finalist for the prize on 3 other occasions. So thank you so much, Don, for being here with us.
Pleasure to be here.
As Steve mentioned, you're the first translator to join us in the series that the good folks at Scuppernong Books have titled The Art of Translation. And in their words, quote, The literature of the world owes its life to translators. And this series will explore the art and the craft of translating from one language to another by presenting conversations with the people who do the work. And that is why we're so pleased to have you with us. While we were preparing for this event, you were kind enough to share with me a text that you wrote a few years ago called "What is a Translator?" And I loved it so much. I really thought that it would be a great way just to start off this conversation before we got into a few other questions. So if you're ready, I'd really love it if you just read this short text to us.
Yeah, well, talking about it a little bit, it's I'm not really a theoretician of translation. I sort of go by the seat of my pants and I enjoy the process, but I'm not a big theoretician of translation. But some years ago, a number of years ago, I was invited to be part of a panel on translation at a kind of conference. It was conducted in French. And so I had to come up with something. So I decided that I would simply write down everything anyone could ever say about translation on one page. It's sat there all these years. And I only translated it a few days ago. I brought it out and thought it might be fun. So if this really works, we could sort of cut everything short and go off and have dinner. So, what is a translator? What is a translator? There is, of course, the old saw treating him as a traitor when it comes to the original work. Tradutore, traditore. But in truth, it's the exact opposite. He's a loyalist rather than a traitor. Sometimes, it must be admitted, a failed loyalist, but a loyalist all the same, who puts himself at the service of a work, who submits to the work, who studies it with devotion, and who tries in every way possible to transmit it to others, and who accepts with great humility the fact that he will never entirely succeed. The translator is the Sisyphus of literature. What is a translator? There are those who will say that a translator is a kind of disciple, a loyalist who is near to saintliness. But is he not rather a parasite, or worse, a vampire, who robs a work of its élan vital in order to nourish his own pseudo-creation? Is there no translator who, once his work is complete, does not reread his own facsimile rather than the original, persuaded that what he has created has in effect surpassed its source? What is a translator? There are those who say that a translator is a kind of parasite, but that is not the case. He is rather an alchemist who must first transform gold into lead, and afterwards, by painful increments, retransform this lead into gold, or at least into silver, in his own language, and who experiences from time to time some mystical moments of grace when he succeeds, without quite knowing how, in practicing a metallurgy that has the appearance of prestidigitation. What is a translator? An alchemist? Rather an equilibrist, a tightrope walker who must forever inch his way across a cord tautly stretched over a landscape where two linguistic currents intersect, intertwine, and merge with one another. He is a diplomat of language who must endlessly reconcile, negotiate, lose a little here, gain something there, devise peace treaties, without ever losing his footing. What is a translator? A loyalist, a parasite, an alchemist, an equilibrist, but in the end, especially when it comes to poetry, a man or woman who is supremely playful. Because in the end, translation is a game, a serious and magnificent game, concrete and abstract at the same time, as sensual as it is cerebral, in which the meanings, the sounds, the rhythms, what is heard, what is implied, are held in constant metamorphosis until something that is the same but not the same, made up of twin words that do not share the same parentage, takes form in order to confer on us something that is new. And the miracle happens. Raising our eyes, we see two celestial bodies where there was only one, We are not sure which is the star and which is the satellite, which is the sun and which is the planet, which sends out light and which reflects it. That is the magic and the mystery of translation.
Bravo, that's really, I think that's so fantastic. Just, I mean, those very contrasting images of parasite and alchemist, and I really like the line about the translator being a diplomat of language. That speaks to me quite a bit. I think that's really wonderful. And the two celestial bodies that, I mean, if you can get, you know, the confusion between those two and which one is the sun or the star. I'm mangling your words now, but that's a real feat to aspire to. So thank you for sharing that with us. Is that text? I know you said you just translated it, but is it available for any of our audience to look back at after tonight?
Not at the moment, but to try and do something about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. We'd be happy to share it with everyone. Yeah. So after that, let's jump into maybe a few more practical questions about your experience as a translator. Could you just tell us a little bit about your linguistic background and how you got your start in translation?
Well, as you said, I was born in Winnipeg, out on the prairies. And this being Canada, there was a French component to the population there. Well, it was across the river in a twin city called Saint Boniface. So I knew it was there, but I didn't have a great deal of contact with it. I remember my older brother, who was a radio freak, introduced me to the French language through tuning me into the local French language radio station. And I also had a mother who had a sentimental attachment to the language. She was from Romania, and she arrived in Canada about the age of 15. She'd been taken out of where she lived and sent over to this new country after her mother died of cancer. She had a brother already leaving here. And one of the people that she most missed was a woman back in Bucharest who was teaching her French. And she always looked back on that with great nostalgia. So that was just, you know, something that was in my mind. You know, this is the old Larousse dictionary that belonged to her, as a matter of fact. Anyway, I won't go on too long. So I studied French at school as of grade 7. I studied it at university. And I was able to read Baudelaire, but I couldn't converse very well. Some years later, when I terminated my education, I took off to Europe, and I ended up spending a year and a half in Paris, teaching English and going to movies. And there I became fairly fluent. When I came back to Canada, I was drawn largely because of the French language. I was nostalgic for it, to Montreal, the city of Montreal, also because Montreal was the most cosmopolitan city in the country at the time. Eventually I joined the National Film Board as a filmmaker. And so I was going in and out of French and English all the time. Some years later, as I was researching a film on a small publisher, I wanted to get some more information on the publishing situation, both in English and French in Montreal. And so I went to see a woman who had a great reputation. Her name was and is Sheila Fishman. She's now my wife, but wasn't then. And she was a pioneer in French to English translation in Canada, had a huge reputation, was a wonderful translator, has now translated over 200 books, not sure how many. So, you know, we became a couple. I did my films, she did her translation. And one day she received a phone call from a publisher who was looking for someone to translate the poetry of a very eminent Quebec poet by the name of Roland Giguère. And she had to say to him, well, that's all very nice, but I translate, but I don't translate poetry. But maybe I know somebody who'd be able to do it for you. I never translated anything. So she suggested me, I took a crack at it, and it worked out. And it ended up turning into this book, which was it's a very nice looking book, called Rose and Thorn. And this was in the 80s, and things kind of went on from there. And I went on to translate both poetry, nonfiction, and fiction. And here we are today.
Oh, that's great. You just alluded to something that actually Steve, it's related to something that Steve said before as well. And it's the fact that you live in Canada, and Canada is officially a bilingual country. And that must create a pretty special environment for translators, with some support that that many translators in other countries may not get. So do you feel that public recognition of translators' work has changed during your career? And do you think that I mean, do you have any sense of what translators in other countries, such as the United States, might deal with that maybe in Canada is not something that you've had to struggle with as much?
Well, vaguely, Canada is somewhat of a special case because translation is very generously supported by our Arts Council, in Canada. And this came about partly as a political gesture, because there was a time going back, say, to the 1970s in particular, where there was tension between English Canada and French Canada. And one of the aims of introducing these Canada Council grants for translation, French to English and English to French, was to encourage Canadian unity and to have the two populations better understand each other. And that became a tradition. And so we had the grants. We have still reasonably, compared to some other places, generous word rates for the translation. And so in some ways we have been favored in that respect, yes. And you don't have obviously the equivalent sort of thing, say, in the United States, where in any case, if you are going to go both ways, it would most likely be Spanish and English than French. But yes.
Steve mentioned that translators are starting to fight for more royalties, recognition. Even getting the name of the translator on the cover has sometimes been an issue. Is that something you've struggled with?
Well, again, I was fortunate. There was a group of translators that formed a translators association many years ago. One of them was my current wife, who was an activist in those days as well. And they really lobbied on some of these issues in terms of money and in terms of recognition. As a result, in Canada today, there are exceptions to the rule, but it is almost automatic that the translator in a French to English translation has his or her name on the cover. I started back in the 1980s, and I've had my name on pretty well every cover of a book I've translated ever since then. On the other hand, it's not the same on the other side. The English to French translators were not as militant, and it's still not nearly as common, and they are now, I think, rallying to get that privilege, just as translators in the United States are now starting to rally more actively for that kind of recognition.
Okay. When you start, we'll get into your process a little bit. When you start a new project, how do you initially approach a text that you're going to translate?
I don't want to say I don't know, Um, depending on the book, sometimes I read the book before. I mean, often, obviously, I read the book before. There are times when I don't, where, if it's a thick nonfiction, I don't want to spend the time, and I'll just start at the beginning and start working through it and doing a rough draft right from the get-go. And I do a draft. We have I do a certain amount of revision as I'm going. I don't tend to, I know my wife, when she's going through a book, she'll write down all kinds of alternative words as she's going through. I don't. I think about it and I choose one and then go back and see it and then revise from there. But it's all words on a page. And so you have to, past a certain point, you have to try and feel the voice of the writer and the rhythm and the pace of the writing. Mm-hmm. And I find rhythm very, very important. I don't that much read aloud, but I think that's something that you gradually get into a groove and you try and match the kind of pace and the kind of music that you get off from the original text. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it is intuitive.
You must have to make choices a lot of times, though. When trying to capture that rhythm, or the tone, or kind of having to choose whether to put more emphasis on replicating the exact words or in the structure, or going more for the meaning and the tone. What kind of choices do you have to make to try to produce something that will be satisfying to you as well as to the author or to the publisher or to finally the readers, I guess?
Well, when I'm translating poetry in particular, I find myself asking myself in this particular passage, is the writer giving priority to the meaning, the rhythm, or the music of the word? And there are times where you will find a passage or a word that is there entirely for the music and not for the rhythm at all. I can give you an example of that from my very first translation, a poem by the poet Roland Giquer, an early surrealist poem that went, something like, and yet for so many needles broken, not a drop of blood, for so many twilights, so many nights, for so much spleen, not a single hair to redden the window's pane, blah, 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 blah. And at one point in French, he writes, tant de vie pour un mort, tant de mots pour un mur. Mort, mur. There's the music. But if you translate it literally, you know what it comes out to? So much life for one death, so many words for one wall.
Yeah.
One death, one wall. And which just absolutely doesn't work. And so I translated, I ignored mur, wall, and I wrote, for one death, so much life, so many words for one breath, which worked musically.
Yeah.
But I don't commit that sin that often. And I was a little wary of doing it for my very first translation. But yes, sometimes you do have to make those sorts of choices so the thing will work.
Yeah, I mean, altering the syntax just to maintain the rhythm and the sound is, that's great to be able to maintain that across languages.
Yeah.
Are there any other examples of things that when you're working on a translation have caused you the most difficulty?
Well, you mentioned syntax, and syntax can be a real challenge. Especially if it's kind of clotted, but not necessarily that. There is a lot of French writing with complex, rolling, interweaving syntax that if you translated it literally would come out in English like a dog's breakfast. And in that case, what you have to do is to take your time, pick the thing apart, and then gradually put it back together again. So you've got the sense, but you've got the rhythm. And sometimes that can take a lot of tries and quite a lot of time. But it's one of the challenges that I rather relish, actually. I talked about translation being a game. Well, that's part of the game.
Yeah. Yeah, that puzzle of translation is fascinating. You have published many translations, and some authors are alive, some not anymore. But when you're working on a text written by an author who is still alive, how closely do you work with that author on the translation?
Well, I'm fortunate that most of the writers I've translated are or were still alive. And being here in Canada, most of them have a reasonable comprehension of English. It varies, but with some of them it's excellent, with some somewhat less so. But usually you do have some significant comprehension. So what I do is, when I get to a certain point in the translation, after I don't know, maybe 3 drafts or something like that, when I think it's it's really taking shape, then I will send it to them for their comments. And in varying degrees, they will offer the comments and suggestions, and of course answering my questions. And sometimes we will then get together side by side in front of the computer and go through the text and work out these problems together. So there are times when it becomes at that stage, a real collaboration. Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. Fascinating. Actually, there's an author I wanted to ask you about. One of your latest translations is of Kevin Lambert, Tu aimeras ce que tu as tué, from 2017, which you translated in 2020 as You Will Love What You Have Killed, available at Scuppernong Books, folks.
That's what it looks like.
Yes.
A very interesting cover.
You are currently finishing the translation of his second novel, Quebec de Roberval, from 2018, and that's gotten a lot of attention from around the Francophone world. Won several prizes and was quite a hit in France, I believe. And I was just wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about his work, and not only, if this is someone that we should be on the lookout for as an up-and-comer, but also tell us about the experience of translating his work.
So, working with Kevin, working on Kevin's books over the last few years has been one of the great pleasures of my career. It's been a really fun and challenging. And he's kind of a wunderkind. I mean, he comes from Chicoutimi, which is this medium-sized town out in east of Montreal, kind of provincial. He grew up gay and had the problems growing up gay in that kind of community. But he's brilliant. And when he came to Montreal and began to live the life he wanted to live, he started to write one of these novels that young people often write, where they take revenge on the place where they grew up. Which is what he did, but he did it in such an original and brilliant way that it attracted a tremendous amount of attention in Quebec. And then when his second book came out, which I will talk about later. His second book was in France published first.
Oh,
And all of a sudden it was in Le Monde. It had a tremendous response. The book was a candidate for the Prix Médicis, which is extraordinary. And then his first book was published later in France, and it too was a finalist for that prize. Now, what makes him so special? Well, this book that he wrote about his hometown, I can give you I don't think it'll spoil the book for you if I tell you briefly what the plot is. It's narrated by this young kid beginning in grade 2 and going up into adolescence. And in this town, over time, mysteriously, there is a kind of epidemic where young kids, one after the other, die grotesque deaths.
mm.
And which are described, some people have described the book as a horror book, but it's not horror the way it's written. It's very stylized, and it's kind of almost black humor. But all the kids die, but then they come back to life immediately and go back to what they were doing. They go back to school. And in the course of the book, all these kids, including the narrator who has suffered the same fate, they gradually get together and they set out to destroy the town they grew up in, which had kind of a geographic fault line in it anyway. And they form this conspiracy and physically blow up the place, and then themselves walk off kind of into the sunset. But it's written with such verve and such humor and such skill, I have to say, that this young man is a real comer. The Querelle, I showed you the cover of the Querelle, and it will be out later this summer. It's going to look something like this.
Oh, advanced copy. Nice.
And, well, it may not be exactly like that. But this book, he turns around, and the core of the book is something that could have come out of the 1930s America. It's a book about a strike in a small town lumber mill, pitting the owner against the workers, with a group of foresters out there who could be on either side. And so there are parts of it that are almost in some ways echo some of this activist writings of the socialist writers, but it's also full of surrealism. Querelle, who is the sort of the hero, is a young man who comes from the city out to this small town. He's a beautiful looking guy, not super smart, but he's gay. And all the young men from the town who want to escape their suffocating families, they come to be ravished by this man. And so you get all the different characters involved in the union and on the side of the owner as well. But there are subtexts, and there are parts of the book that are he has no fear. He's able to shift modes, and the book ends with a pitch battle on a baseball diamond that is something out of the Iliad.
Wow.
and then at the end it's got it morphs into something that is almost operatic. I mean, it's really quite a remarkable achievement. So yes, he is a young man to watch. And for those who are reading now, I would highly recommend that they go to the bookstore and pick up this one.
Yeah, you will love what you have
You will
killed.
love what you have killed.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that insight into that particular author. It sounds like even you have a great relationship with him, and I hope it's nice to see that you've gotten such a meaningful experience out of that translation.
It was fun to be translating a book like that by somebody who could be your grandson.
I've got actually one more question for you before we go over to questions from the audience, and it's just if we have anyone out there who are thinking about maybe or who is thinking about getting into translation, do you have any advice about how to dip your toe or even just start out on their own?
It's kind of hard for me because I just kind of slipped into translation, and I was in my 40s when I did it. So I was never a young person who decided he wanted to be a translator and wanted to figure out how to get into the game. But as with all answers to such questions, first of all, you have to really love it. You have to really, first of all, find it a lot of fun to do, and then to persevere in maybe taking courses, which I never did. There are varying degrees of various opinions as to how useful that really is. But to do it and send things out and meet other people and meet other translators, because they're all over the place. They're not hard to find.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to pass it back over to Steve, who's going to moderate the rest of the time. But thanks again for taking the time to answer my questions. I really learned a lot and I enjoyed talking to you.
Great talking to you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Adam. And please feel free to join into the questions if you wish. Don, we have some in chat, and anyone who wants to ask a question, you can put it in chat. If you don't know how to do that, there's a toolbar at the bottom of your screen and a little dialogue bubble, and you click on that and then you just type it in. So, or in a minute, you can unmute yourself and ask your question directly, but I'm going to go through some of the ones that are in chat now. Are you ever presented a book to translate where you turned down the job because of your personal feelings about the book?
Yes, I mean, I have occasionally turned down a book that either I wasn't crazy about or I felt it was, not my thing. Not that often, but yes, I have turned down books occasionally. Yes.
And do translators tend to work in one direction? In other words, mostly translating French to English versus English to French? You
translate into your mother tongue because it's your mother tongue in which you write best. So almost exclusively, translators translate into their mother tongue. There are exceptions. There are extremely gifted people who go both ways, and I revere them and I admire them, but they are in the minority.
All right. Christopher says, Quebec is a distinct society and little known, even to English Canadians. It has its own cultural context, slang, even varieties of slang and speech, personalities, history, and references that sometimes pop up in novels. How do you deal with references to Quebec people and topics that non-Quebecers and non-Francophones don't know?
Oh, what a question, Chris. I don't know. I translate the book, and as you know, as I said at the beginning, the Canada Council translation program was initiated so that more people in English Canada would, through the literature, get to know about the other part of the country, and there was a real surge in interest in Quebec literature at that time. As for the vocabularies and so on, regional and so on, that I have to just do research and talk to the author about it. I know when Kevin Lambert's Querelle came out in France. In France, they altered it so that, because there were words in there that the French would not understand from Quebec, and rather reluctantly, he allowed them to do that to some extent. I think he'd be more rigorous now. So, but sometimes there are books that you think will be kind of useful in enlightening people about Quebec, some more than others. To make another reference to Sheila Fishman, the first book she translated was a book that had just come out by a writer called Roch Carrier, and there was a kind of a crisis, political crisis at that time in Quebec, and it came out of nowhere and it was snapped up and became a bestseller because of that context. It was called La Guerrière Sœur, and that was an extreme example of this. I haven't seen a phenomenon quite like that, but when it does happen, it's really interesting to watch.
Thanks, Don. Alec wants to know, how would you recommend reading a work that has been translated out of its original language? Is there a certain caution that readers should have due to the power that translators can hold through their translations?
Well, there are translations of all sorts. Brilliant, good, bad, and indifferent. And I think when you do read a book in translation, you just have to give yourself over to it the way you would give yourself over to the original book. If you wanted to get into the real nitty-gritty of it, you can find books that over the years have been translated more than once, and some of those comparisons can be very, very interesting. I mean, they say about the classics that they should be translated and retranslated for their time and place, and I think there definitely is something to that. But I think you have to give the translator, when you read the book, give the translator your confidence, and if there are things that seem to not quite work for you, well, that of course is legitimate.
And that kind of leads into the next question from Brian. Don, he's fascinated by books that have been translated more than once. Is there a work you feel is in need of a new translation?
Boy, that's I can't give you off the top of my head the example of a book that has not been retranslated, but that should be retranslated. If I thought about it, I probably could. But that there has been retranslation even in books that are fairly recent in Canada. There is a famous book called La Vallée des Avalées, or the original translation was called The Swallow Swallowed, and the new translation is Swallowed, that was after, I'm not sure how many years, 20 years or so, maybe more, this was retranslated just a couple of years ago by one of my colleagues. And so this can happen even in fairly recent translations. If it's a book that really made its mark, that is considered important, and that you want to be refreshed for the new generation. There's, I have no problem with that at all.
Thanks, Don. Julian says there's an award, I think from Dublin, that recognizes both the original writer and the translator. Has this award had an important effect on translators?
Well, it certainly has on the ones that won the award. But yes, I think that it's very important because of the contribution that the translator makes, that he or she gets the credit, and in some cases the money involved. There's an important poetry prize in Canada with a lot of money associated with. That is, one part of it is for international books and one is for Canadian books. And translations, it's not specifically for translations, but translations are eligible. And if a translated book wins, then the prize is shared.
So I'm going to throw out a few questions, and please, anyone else who has a question, feel free to put it in chat. So my understanding, Don, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you mentioned word counts before. Generally, in the past, translators have been paid flat rates for translating a book, depending on its length. Is that
a question?
Yes.
Yeah. I guess my own experience has been almost entirely with the Canadian system, the Canada Council, that has, one rate for prose, like for fiction, and a higher word rate for poetry, and even books that do not come under the aegis of the Canada Council. Not everything qualifies. It has to be a Canadian-owned publisher, et cetera, et cetera. Usually there is a word rate that is negotiated, and that's the way it works. Not that it has to work that way, but it's usually based on the work that is to be done. Yeah.
Right. So I read Kevin Lambert's book before we met, and what I'm most fascinated about the translation in that book is the tone that you captured of the book, which is, as you said, there's Black humor in it because some of it is pretty gruesome, but there's also this like ongoing burning rage throughout that book. And I think the balance between the rage that doesn't become so overpowering that, you want to put the book down, and the humor of the book is pretty magical, the way that is accomplished. And so props to you for that. But I'm just wondering how you approach that, because that seemed like a really difficult, or could have been a difficult balance in that book.
Well, I kind of dove into it, but what was crucial for me was to, yes, get the voice, and really to get the pace. It had to move. I could read you some of it, but we don't have time. But it just moves, and it's crisp, and it has to be concrete, and you really have to that cadence and have that pace, because that is the essence of the book, and that is the essence of this kid's voice. There are sentences that kind of run on, but it always it always works, and there's always an edge to the voice, an ironic edge to the voice. And yes, you can really feel the rage and the suffering, but it's so controlled by the way in which it's expressed that it overcomes anything that you might find disgusting just because of the way it's controlled and held together. So not everybody, it won't be everybody's cup of tea, obviously. No book is, but I think I'd be curious to know what young people, how they react to it as well.
Right, right, yeah. And this is kind of a weird off the wall question, but I recognized at least one kind of quote from a Leonard Cohen song in the book. And I wondered if there were other like musical or cultural references in there that I wasn't getting because I'm not Canadian and I wouldn't know what those are. But the one Leonard Cohen thing made me think that there might be more.
Do you remember what it was? Because I don't
Yeah,
even
it's
remember.
I can't remember the scene, but the line is, "She tied me to a kitchen chair and cut my hair."
Oh,
Is
that's in there, yeah.
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 And I didn't know if he was quoting other songs and other pieces of
Well,
culture throughout the book.
they would have been, I can't answer that completely because they would have been in French and I don't know all the French songs. And although it's possible, but it's not run through with them. It may be an occasional reference. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Would anyone like to ask a question? You can unmute yourself and ask directly. Oh, we just got one. Michael says, just a comment about the singular context in which French-English translation takes place. The federal government translates everything in both directions all the time, every day. This has created a subculture of workaday translators. They are not remotely at Donald or Sheila's level, but if you work in government as I did, translating is going on all the time. And I think that is a particular feature of Canadian culture that you were talking about.
I want to thank Michael for that. He's a friend, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, very good.
Which is certainly not something that happens in the States, that cross translation at every point.
No.
Anyone else have a question?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. Hi, Don.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. This is an interesting discussion.
Yeah, it's nice to be on the other side this time.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm from Montreal, as Don is, and I have a question that's related to. I hosted a panel on translation at the last Salon du Livre of Montreal, and one of the people in the audience, there was a team of writer and translator in the audience, Jocelyne Saucier, and her German translator, Sonja Fink. And I learned from them that Sonja Fink had translated Jocelyne Saucier's novel, And the Birds Rained Down, Les oiseaux tombaient du ciel.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know the book, but apparently the German translation sold 100,000 copies in Germany, or more than 100,000 copies, which is way more than it sold in Canada or Quebec, which is quite amazing. I'm wondering if you have had any translations that have taken off like that in a foreign market and kind of open doors and windows for the original author that were kind of way beyond what or beyond what they had at home.
Well, I've had a few books that have gone international, but never to that degree. I mean, Kevin's is one of them. I think the first one, Querelle, I think, must have sold very, very well in France, but I don't have any statistics on it. There's perhaps one other that was kind of a thriller that I think had an opening in Europe in the English language market, but I never get to see these statistics, you know. the publishers are very close to the chest usually in telling you exactly, unless they have something that's really enormous. So it's, but you know, most of most of the sales are here. I know some of the publishers work to get the books in the States, including Biblioasis, who is the publisher of Kevin Lambert. And this event is part of that because it's happening down there in the States and in the context of a very good independent bookstore. So, you know, it's kind of out of my hands, but one always hopes for the best.
And I was negligent in the beginning not to mention Biblioasis, who helped us set up this event and who publishes really great books in translation. There are small presses out there taking lots of risks publishing books in translation, and Biblioasis is one of them. World Editions is another publisher who deals only with books in translation. So there are quite a few small press publishers out there really working hard getting books from different languages to us. So thank you to Biblioasis for facilitating this. Adam, did you have something you wanted to ask?
No, I think I was just pointing out the previous question, and now I see that Jillian has her hand up.
Okay.
Well, I don't want to go over, but I know that there have been some interesting issues about British English and American English in terms of French translations. For example, The Stranger was originally translated by a Brit and messed up the product because they didn't use, Camus was trying to write American English, an American style. And it took a while before the Americans came and translated it the way Camus liked it. But does that situation arise frequently? Has Proust been, improved upon?
You're asking me? I can't, what I would like to talk to is that there were incidents in situations in Canada where an English-Canadian book was translated into French, but translated not in Quebec, but translated by a French translator who got it all wrong, and didn't know the society and didn't know the proper vocabulary. And there are some famous gaffes that were made, and I know at least one book that by a very, very good English Canadian novelist who lives in Quebec. Her first book was translated by a French translator, and it was something of a disaster, and it has since been retranslated by someone here. There was one one instance where there was a book that dealt with baseball, and since the French translator wasn't really familiar with that, he turned it into cricket. So no, I think it is important to get as, but for a classic book, I don't know, if it's a French classic book, if one tends a bit more towards American English and one towards British English, they could both be valid.
And Susan asks, you mentioned that translators are paid based on word count. Is there any participation in sales volume should a translation take off?
Well, I don't know about if it's taking off, but there are instances where you can get royalties if you negotiate for that. It's not in the majority, but you can, royalties are possible if you can order that. And I know that there was one literary book that my wife translated, and she had a little royalty clause, and it sold wildly, and she ended up getting more money from the royalty, I think, than she got for the initial payment. But these again are rare instances.
Okay, last call for questions. Anybody has a burning question? Adam has a burning question.
Well, something popped into my mind because I noticed a few of my students are online with us tonight, and I'm going to enlist Don's help. What should I tell my students when they insist on using Google Translate to read a passage, or to even translate their own work, their own words into, well, in my case in Spanish, but into another language? I guess this is a question about online algorithms that now seem to do the work of translation, but always also seem to miss the essence of what they're doing.
Take them outside and give them a good whopping.
Yeah, good.
Although I think I don't pay much attention to it, but I think it's a Google Translate can be useful for certain things, especially, and is probably improving. But if you're dealing with anything resembling literary translation, stay away from it and do your own work.
Yeah.
Okay, we have one more. Brian wants to know, no, I'm sorry, hold on. Jay wants to know, how would you describe the feeling of knowing that you're reading something that you would love to translate?
How would I describe the sensation of reading something I would love to translate?
Yes.
Excitement. And and I have experienced that more than once, just excitement and eagerness, and a hope that you might get an opportunity to do the work. And that's a great feeling, because I come back to this, it really is a lot of fun working with words that way, with help from other people, from editors and so on, but really working and honing the thing down until you get something that really you feel really is faithful, but really clicks in your own language at the same time.
Have you ever lobbied for a book, Don?
How do you mean lobbied?
Lobbied, tried to get the job of a
Oh, well, I have
particular book?
lobbied in the sense that I've had someone hand me a book in a bookstore, and I've approached a translator, publishers of the book, and tried to get them to take it on. I do that all the time. Sometimes books are offered to me, but often I flog it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Flog it. I like that. Don, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. It's been a great talking to you.
It's been a lot of fun.
We really appreciate it.